The courtroom was unusually quiet that morning, the kind of silence that presses down on your chest and makes you feel like everyone is holding their breath. Lieutenant Maya Thompson stood at the center of it all, her posture straight and composed, despite the storm brewing inside her. She had spent years training herself to remain calm under pressure, whether it was during a high-stakes mission overseas or navigating the complexities of her personal life. But nothing could have prepared her for this moment. Maya's eyes flickered around the room as she took in the scene. The judge, an older man with thinning gray hair and glasses perched on the edge of his nose, sat behind the bench scribbling notes. Opposite her, her estranged husband, Daniel, leaned back confidently in his chair, exuding the same smugness that had infuriated her throughout their marriage. He wasn't just any lawyer. He was one of those attorneys who thrived on tearing people apart in court. Today, his target was Maya, and he wasn't pulling any punches. Daniel's argument was simple yet devastating. Maya's career as a Navy SEAL made her unfit to be a mother. According to him, her long deployments and dangerous missions meant she couldn't provide stability for their son, Ethan. It stung, not because it was true, but because there was a grain of truth buried beneath the exaggeration. Yes, Maya had missed birthdays, school plays, and bedtime stories because she was serving her country, but she had always done everything in her power to stay connected, to call, write letters, send gifts, and make every second count when she was home. To hear Daniel twist her sacrifices into something selfish felt like a punch to the gut. Your honor, Daniel said smoothly, standing up and adjusting his tie. My client believes that while Lieutenant Thompson is undoubtedly accomplished in her professional life, her commitments to the military leave little room for meaningful involvement. In our son's upbringing, Maya clenched her fists slightly, forcing herself not to react. She knew better than to let her emotions get the best of her here. Instead, she focused on breathing deeply, channeling the discipline she'd honed over years of service. But then came the final blow. And furthermore, Daniel continued, his tone dripping with condescension, given the nature of her work, we must consider whether exposing a young child to such instability is truly in his best interest. That was it. Maya couldn't stay silent anymore. Before she could stop herself, she spoke up, her voice firm and unwavering. With all due respect, Your Honor, my career does not define my ability to love and care for my son. I've sacrificed more than most people will ever understand to ensure his future and mine is secure. To suggest otherwise is not only disrespectful but also completely inaccurate. The room seemed to freeze. All eyes turned toward Maya, some curious, others critical. Even Judge Harrison paused mid-sentence, looking up from his notes with raised eyebrows. For a brief moment, Maya allowed herself to feel a flicker of satisfaction. She had said what needed to be said, hadn't she? But before anyone could respond, Officer Greg Parker stepped forward. As the bailiff assigned to maintain order in the courtroom, Parker was supposed to be impartial, a neutral figure whose job was to keep things running smoothly. Unfortunately, neutrality wasn't exactly his strong suit. Known for his short temper and abrasive demeanor, Parker had earned a reputation among colleagues and civilians alike as someone who didn't tolerate disruptions well. Parker approached Maya with slow, deliberate steps, his boots clicking against the tiled floor. His expression was unreadable, but there was a tension in his shoulders that suggested he wasn't happy. When he reached her, he placed a hand firmly on her arm, gripping tighter than necessary. You need to step outside, ma'am, he muttered under his breath, his tone clipped. You're causing a disturbance. Maya frowned, glancing down at his hand. I'm not causing a disturbance, she replied evenly. I'm simply stating my case. Parker's grip tightened and his jaw twitched. I said, step outside. For a split second, Maya considered complying. After all, arguing with a police officer in the middle of a courtroom wouldn't exactly help her cause. But something about the way Parker was treating her, the dismissive tone, the unnecessary force, ignited a spark of defiance deep within her. This wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated or disrespected because of her gender or skin color, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But she refused to let it slide today. I'm not going anywhere until the judge addresses my concerns, Maya stated firmly, meeting Parker's gaze head-on. Her voice carried authority, the kind that came from leading teams in life-or-death situations. Yet instead of backing off, Parker reacted impulsively. Without warning, he shoved Maya hard from behind, sending her stumbling forward. The sound of her body colliding with the defense table echoed through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. Gasps rippled through the audience, followed by murmurs of disbelief. Maya caught herself just in time, bracing her hands against the edge of the table to steady herself. Pain shot through her palms, but she ignored it, turning slowly to face Parker. Her heart pounded in her chest, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Every instinct screamed at her to retaliate, to defend herself the way she'd been trained to do. But Maya forced herself to take a step back, both literally and figuratively. This wasn't a battlefield, and losing control now would only play into Parker's narrative. Still, the anger simmering beneath the surface was undeniable. Judge, Harrison slammed his gavel hard enough to startle everyone. "Order," he barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "What is going on here?" All eyes shifted between Maya and Parker, waiting for someone to explain. Parker straightened up, adopting an air of professionalism that clashed sharply with his earlier actions. "Your Honor, the defendant became disruptive and refused to comply with my instructions," he said, his tone measured but laced with accusation. Maya opened her mouth to protest, but stopped herself. Arguing right now would only escalate the situation further. Instead, she squared her shoulders and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, I apologize if my response was out of line. However, I believe Officer Parker's actions were excessive and unwarranted. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. No one moved, no one spoke. Everyone seemed to be holding their collective breath, waiting to see how this unexpected confrontation would unfold. What none of them realized yet was that this single incident would set off a chain reaction, one that would change lives forever. Maya's journey to becoming one of the most respected Navy SEALs in the country wasn't an easy one. It was a path paved with obstacles, sacrifices, and moments that tested her strength and resolve in ways most people couldn't imagine. But Maya wasn't like most people. From a young age, she had learned to fight for what she wanted, not just because she had to, but because giving up was never an option. Growing up in a small town in Georgia, Maya's childhood was far from idyllic. Her father walked out when she was only 6 years old, leaving her mother to raise 3 kids on her own. Money was tight, and there were days when dinner consisted of nothing more than canned beans and stale bread. Yet through it all, Maya's mother instilled in her children the belief that they could achieve anything if they worked hard enough. "You're stronger than you think," she would tell Maya whenever life got tough. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." It was that lesson, those words, that stayed with Maya as she navigated the challenges of adolescence. She excelled in school, not because she loved studying, but because she saw education as her ticket out of poverty. By the time she graduated high school, Maya had earned scholarships to several colleges, but none of them felt quite right. Something inside her yearned for something bigger, something more meaningful. So instead of enrolling in college, she made a bold decision. She joined the military. At first, everyone thought she was crazy. Her friends laughed it off, assuming she'd back out once reality set in. Even her older brother tried to talk her out of it, warning her about how brutal the training would be. But Maya didn't listen. She knew what she wanted, and she wasn't afraid to chase it, even if it meant proving herself in a world dominated by men. Basic underwater demolition, SEAL, Bud-S training was every bit as grueling as people said it would be, and then some. The physical demands were relentless. Running miles in soft sand with heavy boots, swimming through icy ocean waves in pitch darkness, enduring hours of push-ups, sit-ups, and log drills until her muscles screamed in protest. But the physical pain was only part of the challenge. Bud-S was designed to break people mentally, to push them to their limits and force them to confront their deepest fears and insecurities. For Maya, The mental battle was even harder than the physical one. As one of the few women in her class, she faced constant scrutiny and doubt, not just from her instructors but from her peers as well. Some openly questioned whether she belonged there, while others dismissed her efforts entirely. There were whispers behind her back, snide comments about how she'd never make it through Hell Week, the infamous 5.5-day stretch of non-stop physical and mental torture that weeded out nearly 80% of candidates. But Maya refused to let negativity bring her down. Every time someone doubted her, she used it as fuel to push harder. When her body begged her to quit during Hell Week, she remembered her mother's voice telling her she was stronger than she thought. And when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her during endless hours of surf torture, where recruits lay face down in freezing water while waves crashed over them, she focused on the goal ahead, reminding herself why she started this journey in the first place. By the time graduation day arrived, Maya was one of only a handful of candidates still standing. Out of hundreds who began the program, fewer than 20 made it to the end. Standing on the beach in Coronado, California, surrounded by fellow SEALs and their families, Maya felt a surge of pride, unlike anything she'd ever experienced. She had done it. Against all odds, she had proven herself worthy of wearing the Trident insignia, a symbol of resilience, courage, and unwavering determination. But earning the title of Navy SEAL was just the beginning. Over the next decade, Maya distinguished herself in ways that left even seasoned veterans in awe. Whether leading covert operations in hostile territories or mentoring younger recruits struggling to find their footing, she approached every task with precision and passion. Her superiors praised her leadership skills, noting how she always put her team first, ensuring everyone returned home safely. Her teammates admired her humility, knowing she never sought recognition for her accomplishments, despite deserving every bit of it. Yet for all her success, Maya's journey wasn't without its share of struggles. Being a black woman in such a male-dominated field meant facing biases and stereotypes at every turn. Early in her career, she often found herself working twice as hard as her male counterparts just to earn the same level of respect. There were times when commanding officers underestimated her abilities, assigning her to less critical roles simply because they assumed she wouldn't be able to handle the pressure. And there were countless instances where casual racism reared its ugly head, in jokes that weren't funny, in assumptions that cut deep, in sideways glances that spoke volumes. But Maya didn't let any of it stop her. Instead, she channeled those experiences into motivation, using them to drive change within the ranks. She became a vocal advocate for diversity and inclusion, speaking out about the importance of representation in the military. She volunteered her time to mentor young women interested in joining the armed forces, sharing her story to inspire and encourage them. Slowly but surely, she began to see progress, not just in the attitudes of those around her, but in the opportunities available to future generations. Despite her demanding career, Maya never lost sight of her personal values. Family remained a cornerstone of her life, even as distance and deployments made relationships complicated. She cherished the moments she spent with her son, Ethan, making sure to create memories whenever possible. Whether it was teaching him how to ride a bike, reading bedtime stories over video calls, or surprising him with gifts sent from halfway across the world, Maya poured her heart into being present, even when she couldn't physically be there. Her dedication didn't go unnoticed. Friends and family marveled at how she managed to balance her responsibilities as a mother and a soldier, often wondering aloud how she did it all. For Maya, the answer was simple: love. Love for her country, love for her team, and above all, love for her son. That love kept her grounded, reminding her of the reasons she fought so hard both on and off the battlefield. As news of the courtroom incident spread these qualities, her strength, resilience, and unwavering commitment to doing what was right became central to public perception. People who had never met Maya before suddenly found themselves rooting for her, inspired by her story, and outraged by the injustice she faced. Social media buzzed with hashtags like Stand With Maya and Justice for Heroes, amplifying her voice and shining a spotlight on the systemic issues she represented. Maya wasn't just a victim of police misconduct, she was a symbol of hope, proof that no obstacle was insurmountable if you refused to give up. Her past achievements served as a reminder of her capabilities, while her current fight highlighted the ongoing struggles faced by marginalized communities. The stage was set for a reckoning, one that would test not only Maya's resolve but also the integrity of those tasked with upholding justice. The courtroom incident didn't stay confined to the walls of Judge Harrison's chamber for long. Within hours, someone in the audience, perhaps a concerned citizen, maybe even one of Maya's friends, had recorded the confrontation on their phone and uploaded it online. The video wasn't perfect. It was shaky and grainy, but it captured everything. Officer Greg Parker shoving Lieutenant Maya Thompson from behind, her body colliding with the defense table, and the stunned silence that followed. It didn't take long for the clip to go. Viral. Social media exploded almost instantly. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok were flooded with reactions, opinions, and outrage. People watched the video over and over again, dissecting every frame, every movement. Some focused on Parker's aggressive behavior, pointing out how unnecessary and excessive his actions seemed. Others highlighted Maya's composure in the face of such blatant disrespect, marveling at how she managed to keep her cool, despite being physically assaulted in a place where she should have felt safe. Hashtags began trending within minutes. Justice for Maya quickly became a rallying cry, drawing attention not only to the specific incident, but also to broader issues of police misconduct and systemic racism. Posts poured in from all corners of the internet, ordinary citizens sharing their thoughts, activists calling for accountability, veterans expressing solidarity with Maya. Even high-profile figures weighed in, amplifying the conversation and demanding answers. Local news outlets picked up the story shortly after, airing segments during evening broadcasts. Anchors read statements from witnesses who described the tense atmosphere in the courtroom, emphasizing how shocking and unexpected the altercation had been. Legal analysts debated whether Parker's actions constituted assault or simply excessive force, while civil rights advocates argued that this was yet another example of law enforcement targeting marginalized individuals. By the end of the day, the story had made national headlines. For Maya, the sudden influx of attention was overwhelming. She hadn't planned for any of this. When she walked into the courtroom that morning, her sole focus was on fighting for custody of her son, Ethan. Now she found herself at the center of a media storm, thrust into the spotlight as both a victim and a symbol of resilience. Friends and family called non-stop, offering support and advice. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications from social media platforms, messages pouring in from strangers thanking her for standing up against injustice. But amidst the chaos, Maya remained remarkably calm. Years of training in high-pressure situations had taught her how to compartmentalize her emotions, focusing on what needed to be done rather than getting swept away by panic or anger. Still, she couldn't ignore the weight of what was happening. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about sending a message about holding people accountable for their actions. Meanwhile, Officer Greg Parker seemed oblivious to the growing backlash. In interviews with internal affairs investigators, he doubled down on his version of events, insisting that he had acted appropriately given the circumstances. According to him, Maya had been disruptive and uncooperative, forcing him to intervene to maintain order. He dismissed accusations of bias or prejudice, claiming he treated everyone the same regardless of race, gender, or background. Parker's defense fell flat for many reasons, not least because footage from other angles soon surfaced online. A security camera mounted near the ceiling of the courtroom provided a clearer view of the incident, showing unequivocally that Parker initiated contact without provocation. The video contradicted his claims entirely, sparking fresh waves of outrage across social media. Commenters pounced on the new evidence, accusing Parker of lying and demanding immediate consequences for his actions. As pressure mounted, Parker grew increasingly defensive. In public statements released through his attorney, he attempted to paint himself as the real victim, a hard-working officer unfairly maligned by cancel culture. He accused Maya of exaggerating the situation for personal gain, suggesting that her status as a decorated Navy SEAL gave her an unfair advantage in garnering sympathy. His tone bordered on dismissive, almost mocking, as if he believed his position as a police officer granted him immunity from criticism. This attitude infuriated Maya, but she refused to engage directly. Instead, she channeled her energy into building a case against Parker, enlisting the help of trusted allies to gather evidence and formulate a strategy. Among these allies were fellow veterans who had served alongside her during deployments, lawyers specializing in civil rights cases, and members of advocacy groups dedicated to combating police brutality. Together, they worked tirelessly to ensure that Parker's actions wouldn't go unpunished. One of the first steps Maya took was filing a formal complaint with the police department's Internal Affairs Division. Accompanied by her legal team, she submitted detailed documentation outlining the incident, including timestamps, witness accounts, and copies of the viral videos. She also requested access to any additional surveillance footage from the courthouse, determined to leave no stone unturned in her pursuit of justice. Simultaneously, Maya decided to escalate the matter further by filing a lawsuit against both Parker and the city. With the guidance of her attorneys, she crafted a comprehensive legal argument alleging assault, misconduct, and abuse of power. The lawsuit sought damages for emotional distress, reputational harm, and violation of her constitutional rights. More importantly, it aimed to expose systemic failures within law enforcement that allowed officers like Parker to act with impunity. Throughout this process, Maya leaned heavily on her support system. Her mother, who had always been her biggest cheerleader, reminded her to stay strong and trust the process. Close friends checked in regularly, making sure she wasn't carrying the burden alone. And then there were the countless messages from strangers, people who had never met her but felt inspired by her courage. Their words of encouragement buoyed her spirits on days when doubt crept in. Public opinion continued to shift decisively in Maya's favor. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse holding signs that read, "Accountability now" and "Protect our heroes." Community leaders organized rallies, using the incident as a springboard to discuss larger issues of racial inequality and police reform. Even politicians joined the chorus, issuing statements condemning Parker's behavior and calling for transparency in the investigation. Despite the mounting pressure, Parker clung to his narrative, convinced that he could weather the storm. But cracks were beginning to show. Internal Affairs investigators uncovered troubling patterns in his professional history, multiple complaints of excessive force, allegations of verbal abuse, and instances where he had allegedly used his authority to intimidate civilians. While none of these incidents had resulted in formal discipline, they painted a damning picture of an officer prone to aggression and unchecked power. When confronted with this information during subsequent interviews, Parker struggled to explain away the discrepancies. His explanations grew increasingly convoluted, raising more questions than answers. Sensing weakness, Maya's legal team pressed harder, gathering affidavits from past complainants and cross-referencing records to build an ironclad case. By the time depositions rolled around, tensions were running high. Sitting across from Parker in a sterile conference room, Maya maintained her characteristic composure, her expression unreadable. For his part, Parker seemed agitated, shifting uncomfortably in his seat as attorneys grilled him about his conduct. At one point, he attempted to intimidate Maya, sneeringly questioning whether someone with her background truly understood the challenges of maintaining order in a courtroom. It was a low blow designed to undermine her credibility and provoke a reaction. But Maya didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, fixing him with a steely gaze. "Officer Parker," she said evenly, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "I've faced far greater challenges than you'll ever know. Your attempts to belittle me won't change the fact that you violated my rights, and I intend to hold you accountable." The room went silent. Even Parker looked momentarily taken aback, unsure of how to respond. For the first time since the incident, he seemed genuinely rattled. And though Maya didn't let it show, she felt a flicker of satisfaction knowing that she had struck a nerve. The deposition marked a turning point in the case. Armed with new evidence and bolstered by public support, Maya's team prepared to take the fight to court. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Challenging a police officer's actions often meant battling entrenched systems resistant to change. But they were ready. After all, Maya had spent her entire life overcoming obstacles. This was just another chapter in her story, one she was determined to write on her own terms. The investigation into Officer Greg Parker's actions moved forward with a momentum that surprised even Maya. What started as a single viral video had snowballed into a full-blown reckoning, shining an unflattering light not just on Parker but on the broader issues of accountability and misconduct within law enforcement. As internal affairs dug deeper, they uncovered a trail of red flags that painted a troubling picture of Parker's career and his character. Records revealed a pattern of behavior that many found alarming. Over the years, Parker had been the subject of numerous complaints from civilians who accused him of using excessive force or acting aggressively without justification. One case involved a teenage boy who claimed Parker had slammed him against a wall during a routine traffic stop because he talked back. Another complaint came from an elderly woman who said Parker had shouted at her in public after she questioned why her car had been towed. None of these incidents had resulted in formal charges or disciplinary action. Instead, they were quietly dismissed or buried under layers of bureaucracy. But it wasn't just individual cases that raised eyebrows. Internal memos showed that Parker's superiors had repeatedly flagged him for problematic conduct, warning him about his temper and advising him to improve his interpersonal skills. Yet no real consequences followed. Instead, Parker continued to rise through the ranks, earning promotions and accolades despite the growing list of grievances against him. To many observers, this suggested a systemic failure, a culture where officers like Parker were shielded from accountability rather than held responsible for their actions. For Maya, these revelations were infuriating but unsurprising. She had seen similar patterns before, both in her personal life and during her military career. People in positions of authority often wielded their power carelessly, confident that they wouldn't face repercussions unless someone forced the issue. And forcing the issue was exactly what Maya intended to do. With each new piece of evidence, Maya's legal team grew more confident in their case. They meticulously compiled documents, witness statements, and expert analyses to build a narrative that left little room for doubt. Officer Greg Parker had abused his position, violated Maya's rights, and demonstrated a history of reckless behavior that made him unfit to serve as a police officer. But proving wrongdoing wasn't enough. They also needed to ensure that justice wasn't diluted by technicalities or swept under the rug. Depositions became a critical battleground. During one particularly tense session, Parker appeared visibly agitated, shifting uncomfortably in his chair as attorneys grilled him about specific incidents from his past. When asked about the teenage boy he allegedly assaulted during a traffic stop, Parker dismissed the accusation as a misunderstanding, insisting that the boy had provoked him by being disrespectful. His tone carried a hint of arrogance, as though he believed his version of events would be accepted without question. Maya sat quietly across the table, watching every move, every flicker of emotion on Parker's face. She knew better than to interrupt or react impulsively. This wasn't a physical confrontation but a mental one, and she was determined to stay several steps ahead. When it was finally her turn to speak, she leaned forward slightly, her voice steady and measured. "Officer Parker," she began, locking eyes with him. "You've mentioned several times today that your actions are guided by protocol and necessity. Can you explain why in this instance you felt it was necessary to shove me, a decorated military officer and a civilian in a courtroom, without any provocation?" Parker hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the directness of the question. For a moment he seemed unsure how to respond. Then, recovering his composure, he launched into a rehearsed explanation about maintaining order and ensuring safety. But Maya wasn't satisfied. "So you're saying that my refusal to leave the courtroom posed such a significant threat that physical force was warranted?" she pressed, her tone calm but pointed. even though I was simply exercising my right to address the judge? Parker bristled, his jaw tightening. I don't have to justify myself to you, he snapped, his voice rising slightly. You were disruptive, and I did what I thought was best. And what gave you the authority to decide what was best? Maya countered, her words cutting through the tension like a blade. Was it your badge? Your uniform? Or was it something else entirely? The room fell silent. Even Parker's attorney seemed momentarily stunned, unsure how to steer the conversation back in their favor. For the first time since the deposition began, Parker looked genuinely rattled. He fidgeted with the papers in front of him, avoiding eye contact as sweat beaded on his forehead. It was a small victory, but for Maya it was significant. She had spent years mastering the art of staying composed under pressure, whether leading missions in hostile environments or navigating high-stakes negotiations. Now, those same skills were serving her well in this fight. Every word she spoke, every question she asked was calculated, not just to expose the truth but to dismantle Parker's defenses brick by brick. Outside the courtroom, public sentiment continued to shift decisively in Maya's favor. Protesters gathered regularly outside police headquarters, chanting slogans and holding signs that demanded accountability. Community leaders organized town hall meetings, inviting experts to discuss the root causes of police misconduct and propose solutions. Social media buzzed with hashtags like Ours Hold Them Accountable and Our No More Excuses, keeping the pressure on local officials to take action. The media played a pivotal role in amplifying the story, with journalists uncovering additional details about Parker's history that further tarnished his reputation.
One investigative report revealed that Parker had previously been reprimanded for falsifying reports to cover up mistakes, a revelation that sparked outrage among viewers and added fuel to calls for his termination. Another expose highlighted
discrepancies in how complaints against officers were handled, pointing out that cases involving minority victims were far less likely to result in discipline than those involving white citizens. As the scrutiny intensified, cracks began to form within the police department itself. Several of Parker's colleagues broke their silence, speaking anonymously to reporters about the toxic work environment fostered by officers like him. One officer described Parker as a loose cannon who thrived on intimidation, while another admitted feeling uneasy whenever Parker was assigned to patrol duty. These accounts lent credibility to Maya's claims, reinforcing the idea that Parker's behavior was part of a larger pattern rather than an isolated incident. Facing mounting pressure, the district attorney's office announced that it would review the case to determine whether criminal charges should be filed against Parker. This marked a major turning point in the investigation, signaling that authorities were finally taking the allegations seriously. For Maya, it was a bittersweet moment. On one hand, she felt vindicated knowing that her voice, and the voices of countless others, was being heard. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the frustration of having to fight so hard just to hold someone accountable for something that should have been obvious from the start. Throughout this process, Maya remained acutely aware of the bigger picture. While securing justice for herself was important, she recognized that her case represented something much larger, a chance to challenge systemic inequities and demand meaningful reform. With that in mind, she began using her platform to advocate for change beyond the courtroom. She gave interviews to national news outlets, sharing her story not as a tale of victimhood, but as a call to action. She emphasized the need for transparency, accountability, and cultural shifts within law enforcement, urging lawmakers to implement policies that prioritized public trust over institutional loyalty. Her advocacy resonated deeply with audiences, inspiring people from all walks of life to join the movement. Veterans rallied behind her, organizing fundraisers to support her legal expenses and spreading awareness about the challenges faced by service members when interacting with law enforcement. Civil rights groups partnered with her to push for legislative reforms, drafting petitions and lobbying elected officials to address long-standing issues of bias and misconduct. Even celebrities joined the cause, amplifying her message on social media and encouraging fans to get involved. Despite the progress, Maya knew the fight was far from over. Legal battles could drag on for months or even years, and there was no guarantee that Parker would face the consequences he deserved. Still, she refused to lose sight of her ultimate goal, creating a world where everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background, could expect fairness and respect from those sworn to protect them. One evening, as she sat alone in her living room reviewing court documents, Maya allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the struggles, the sacrifices, the moments of triumph and heartbreak. She thought about her son, Ethan, and the kind of future she wanted to build for him. Most of all, she thought about the countless individuals who had stood beside her along the way, lending their strength when hers faltered. A slow smile spread across her face as she realized something profound. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It belonged to everyone who believed in justice, equality, and the power of standing up, even when the odds. The momentum of Maya's case continued to build, fueled by a combination of public outrage, mounting evidence, and her unwavering determination. As the investigation unfolded, it became increasingly clear that Officer Greg Parker's actions were not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of misconduct. Yet what truly tipped the scales in Maya's favor was the discovery of a piece of surveillance footage that no one had anticipated. A second angle from a courthouse security camera that captured the altercation with chilling clarity. This new video showed everything: Parker's approach toward Maya, his aggressive body language the moment he shoved her without provocation, and her subsequent stumble into the defense table. There was no ambiguity this time, no room for interpretation or excuses. The footage left little doubt that Parker had initiated physical contact, undermining his claims of self-defense or necessity. When Maya's legal team presented the video during pretrial hearings, it sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Parker's attorney tried to downplay the significance of the footage, arguing that it didn't provide full context and insisting that Parker had acted within the scope of his duties. But even Judge Harrison, who had initially seemed skeptical of Maya's allegations, appeared visibly troubled by what he saw. For the first time since the case began, cracks started to form in Parker's once confident demeanor. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact as murmurs rippled through the gallery. Outside the courthouse, the release of the new video reignited public interest in the case. News outlets aired segments dissecting every frame, while social media exploded with reactions. Hashtags like "No Excuses for Abuse" and "Justice Cannot Wait" trended nationwide, drawing attention not only to Maya's story but also to similar cases of police brutality that had gone unresolved. Protesters gathered outside courthouses across the country, holding signs that read, "Accountability saves lives," and "Enough is enough." The message was loud and clear. People were tired of seeing officers evade consequences for their actions. For Maya, the renewed focus on her case brought both validation and pressure. On one hand, she felt empowered knowing that so many people supported her fight for justice. On the other hand, she understood that the stakes were higher than ever. If Parker walked away unpunished, it would send a dangerous message. That law enforcement could act with impunity, even when caught on camera. Determined to prevent that outcome, Maya threw herself into preparing for trial, working closely with her attorneys to refine their strategy. One of the most critical aspects of their preparation involved gathering testimony from witnesses who could corroborate Maya's account of the incident. Among them was Daniel, Maya's estranged husband, whose presence in the courtroom added a layer of complexity to the proceedings. While Daniel had initially sided with Parker, portraying Maya as disruptive and unreasonable, his testimony under cross-examination revealed inconsistencies that undermined his credibility. When asked whether he believed Maya posed a genuine threat to courtroom safety, Daniel hesitated before admitting that her behavior hadn't been particularly aggressive, at least not enough to justify physical intervention. "You're saying Lieutenant Thompson was upset, yes?" Maya's attorney pressed, leaning forward slightly. "But did you feel threatened by her at any point?" Daniel shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, not exactly," he admitted reluctantly. She was frustrated, sure, but I wouldn't say she was dangerous. The admission was subtle yet significant, chipping away at Parker's narrative that force had been necessary. It also highlighted the personal dynamics at play, reminding everyone that this wasn't just a legal battle. It was deeply intertwined with Maya's efforts to maintain custody of her son, Ethan. As the trial date approached, tensions reached a boiling point. Parker, sensing the walls closing in around him, grew increasingly desperate. In interviews with local news stations, he doubled down on his version of events, portraying himself as a scapegoat targeted by activists seeking to discredit law enforcement. He accused Maya of exploiting her status as a Navy SEAL to manipulate public opinion, claiming she was more interested in scoring political points than seeking justice. But Parker's attempts to deflect responsibility only made him appear defensive and out of touch. His tone came across as dismissive, almost mocking, which alienated potential allies and further damaged his reputation. Meanwhile, Maya remained steadfast, refusing to engage in petty arguments or stoop to his level. Instead, she focused on delivering a powerful rebuttal, not just against Parker but against the systemic issues his behavior represented. During opening statements, Maya's attorney painted a vivid picture of what had transpired in the courtroom that day, framing Parker's actions as emblematic of a larger problem within law enforcement. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the attorney began, pacing slowly in front of the jurors, "this case isn't just about one officer's decision to use excessive force. It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that those entrusted with protecting our communities are held to the highest standards, not shielded from scrutiny when they fail to meet them." The statement resonated deeply with the jury, setting the stage for a compelling presentation of evidence. Over the course of several days, Maya's legal team methodically dismantled Parker's defense, presenting witness testimonies, expert analyses, and the damning surveillance footage. They also introduced character witnesses who spoke glowingly of Maya's integrity, discipline, and commitment to serving others. One such witness was Commander Harris, a retired Navy SEAL, who had trained Maya during Bud S and witnessed firsthand her ability to remain calm under pressure. "Lieutenant Thompson is one of the strongest individuals I've ever met, Commander," Harris testified, his voice filled with conviction. "She doesn't back down from challenges, but she also knows how to pick her battles. What happened in that courtroom wasn't defiance. It was standing up for herself in a situation where she deserved to be treated with respect." The cumulative effect of these testimonies was undeniable. By the time closing arguments rolled around, the tide had turned decisively in Maya's favor. Her attorney delivered a passionate summation, urging the jury to recognize the gravity of their decision. "This isn't just about punishing wrongdoing," the attorney concluded. "It's about sending a message to Officer Parker, to law enforcement agencies everywhere, and to the public that we value transparency, fairness, and justice above all else. Let today be the day we take a stand against abuse of power and demand better from those sworn to protect us." When the jury finally retired to deliberate, anticipation hung thick in the air. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, awaiting the verdict. Supporters gathered nearby, holding candles and chanting slogans in solidarity with Maya. Inside, Maya sat quietly with her legal team, her expression unreadable, but her heart racing with nervous excitement. She knew the outcome would define not just her future, but the futures of countless others who looked to her as a symbol of hope. Hours passed before the jury returned, their faces betraying nothing as they filed back into the courtroom. Judge Harrison instructed them to deliver their verdict, and the foreperson stood, clearing her throat before speaking. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Officer Greg Parker, guilty of assault and misconduct in the line of duty." The room erupted, in cheers, tears streaming down faces as people hugged one another in relief and celebration. Maya allowed herself a small smile, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. Justice had been served, but she knew this was only the beginning. The real work lay ahead, transforming the system that had enabled Parker's behavior in the first place and ensuring that no one else had to endure what she had. As reporters swarmed her for comments, Maya stepped forward, her voice steady and resolute. "Today's verdict is a step in the right direction," she said, addressing the crowd. "But let's not forget why we're here. We're here because too many people have suffered silently, while those in power looked the other way. My fight doesn't end here. This is just the start of something bigger, a movement toward accountability, equality, and change." With those words, Maya turned and walked away, leaving behind a legacy that would inspire generations to come. The verdict against Officer Greg Parker marked a turning point, not just for Maya but for the entire community. It was a rare moment of accountability in a system often criticized for protecting its own at all costs. For many, the guilty verdict felt like a small victory in a much larger war, a sign that change, however slow and difficult, was possible. But for Maya, it wasn't just about winning. It was about using her experience to spark meaningful reform. In the days following the trial, media coverage reached fever pitch. News outlets hailed Maya as a symbol of resilience and justice, highlighting how she had stood up to systemic abuse and refused to back down. Interviews poured in from national networks, talk shows, and podcasts, each eager to hear her story. While some people might have been overwhelmed by the sudden attention, Maya handled it with the same grace and determination that had carried her through every challenge in her life. She saw this as an opportunity, an opening to amplify her voice and push for the changes she believed were long overdue. During one particularly poignant interview on a popular morning show, Maya spoke candidly about the emotional toll of the ordeal. "This hasn't been easy," she admitted, her voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. "There were moments when I doubted myself, when I wondered if fighting this battle was worth it. But then I remembered something my mother always told me: you're stronger than you think. And so I kept going, not just for me, but for everyone who deserves to be treated with dignity and respect." Her words resonated deeply with viewers, many of whom shared their own stories of injustice and frustration in the comments section. Some recounted experiences with law enforcement officers who had abused their power. Others expressed gratitude for Maya's courage, saying her case gave them hope that accountability was still achievable. The outpouring of support reinforced Maya's belief that her fight wasn't hers alone. It belonged to everyone who yearned for fairness and equality. With the trial behind her, Maya turned her focus toward advocacy work. She founded an organization called Path to Justice, dedicated to supporting victims of police misconduct and advocating for systemic reform. The mission was simple, yet ambitious: to create a world where no one had to fear those sworn to protect them. Through Path to Justice, Maya organized workshops, hosted panel discussions, and partnered with lawmakers to draft legislation aimed at increasing transparency and accountability within law enforcement agencies. One of the organization's first initiatives was a nationwide campaign to implement mandatory body cameras for all police officers. Drawing on her own experience with surveillance footage playing a pivotal role in securing justice, Maya argued that such technology could serve as a vital tool in holding officers accountable, while also protecting them from false accusations. Her efforts gained traction quickly, earning endorsements from civil rights groups, veterans organizations, and even some progressive politicians. But Maya didn't stop there. Recognizing that policy changes alone wouldn't address the root causes of misconduct, she launched educational programs designed to foster better relationships between law enforcement and marginalized communities. These programs brought together officers and civilians for open dialogues, encouraging mutual understanding and empathy. They also provided training sessions on de-escalation techniques, cultural sensitivity, and conflict resolution, skills Maya knew firsthand could save lives. As her influence grew, Maya became a sought-after speaker at rallies, conferences, and community events. One of her most memorable appearances took place at a national rally held in Washington, D.C., where thousands of people gathered to demand comprehensive police reform. Standing on stage beneath a bright blue sky, Maya addressed the crowd with a passion that left no one unmoved. "We are here today because we believe in a better future," she began, her voice strong and clear. "A future where our children can walk down the street without fearing for their safety. A future where wearing a uniform doesn't give anyone the right to trample on someone else's rights. A future where justice isn't a privilege reserved for the powerful, It's a promise kept for everyone. The crowd erupted in applause, chanting her name and waving signs emblazoned with slogans like "Justice for All" and "Reform Now." Maya paused, letting the energy wash over her before continuing. "They tried to silence me," she said, her tone softening but no less resolute. "They tried to make me feel small, to make me doubt my worth. But I stood tall. And now, together, we will stand taller, for truth, for fairness, and for a system that truly serves us all." Her speech went viral, viewed millions of times online, and quoted in editorials across the globe. It solidified Maya's status as not just a survivor, but a leader, a beacon of hope for anyone fighting for justice. Yet despite the accolades, Maya remained humble, consistently redirecting praise toward the collective effort driving the movement forward. Behind the scenes, Maya worked tirelessly to ensure that her advocacy translated into tangible results. She collaborated with legal experts to draft model policies for police departments, emphasizing measures like independent oversight boards and stricter disciplinary protocols for officers found guilty of misconduct. She also lobbied state legislatures to pass laws requiring regular psychological evaluations for law enforcement personnel, arguing that mental health played a crucial role in preventing abusive behavior. Her hard work paid off. Within months, several states adopted versions of the reform she championed, citing her testimony and research as key influences. The Department of Justice announced plans to conduct a nationwide review of policing practices, pledging to prioritize transparency and accountability. Even skeptical critics began to acknowledge the impact of Maya's efforts, grudgingly admitting that her approach combined compassion with practical solutions. Still, Maya understood that progress would take time and patience. Not everyone welcomed her calls for reform, especially within law enforcement circles. Some officers accused her of demonizing their profession, while others dismissed her proposals as unrealistic or overly idealistic. Online trolls targeted her social media accounts, leaving hateful comments and spreading misinformation. But Maya refused to let negativity derail her mission. Instead, she leaned on her support network, her family, friends, and fellow advocates, to stay grounded and focused. Ethan, her son, proved to be one of her greatest sources of strength. Now older and more aware of what his mother had endured, he expressed pride in her accomplishments, often telling her, "You're my hero." Their bond deepened during this period, as Maya made a conscious effort to spend more quality time with him. Whether it was coaching his little league team, helping him with homework, or simply sharing stories about her childhood, she cherished every moment they spent together. By the end of the year, Maya's impact extended far beyond the courtroom. Path to Justice had grown into a thriving nonprofit, with chapters in multiple cities, offering resources and support to countless individuals affected by police misconduct. Lawmakers credited her advocacy with inspiring landmark legislation aimed at improving accountability and rebuilding trust between communities and law enforcement. And perhaps most importantly, Maya had ignited a sense of empowerment among everyday citizens, reminding them that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, their voices mattered. Looking back on everything she had accomplished, Maya felt a profound sense of fulfillment, but also a quiet resolve. She knew the fight for justice was never truly finished. There would always be new challenges to confront, new battles to wage. But she also knew that as long as people like her continued to stand up, speak out, and refuse to settle for anything less than fairness, the arc of history would bend ever closer toward equity. On a crisp autumn evening, Maya stood on the porch of her home, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Ethan sat beside her, sketching pictures in a notebook as the sky turned shades of orange and pink. For a moment, everything felt peaceful, a reminder of why she fought so hard in the first place. "You did good, Mom," Ethan said suddenly, breaking the silence. He looked up at her, his eyes shining with admiration. "Really good." Maya smiled, ruffling his hair affectionately. "We did good," she corrected gently, "and we're not done yet." As the stars began to twinkle overhead, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead might be long, but she was ready. After all, she had already proven that she could face whatever came her way, with strength, resilience, and an unshakable belief in the power of doing what was right.